Yeah, we are excited about this talk. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll start in just a minute. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Hi, everyone. I'm Marisa Thompson. Thanks for joining us for Ready, Set, Grow, our gardening webinar series that is ongoing and continues to be very fun for the group, the team that is putting this together behind the scenes. And so before we get started today, I would like to tell you a little bit about our team and how these sessions go in case you are new joining us for these presentations. So I'm going to put the link right now in the chat. And so the link is to our Ready, Set, Grow website where you can sign up and for future presentations, see some of the presentations that are coming up this summer and planned through October. We are taking your input from our surveys. You'll see a survey link later in the presentation, and we're getting input from you on the topics that you'd like to see for future talks. So the team that's putting on these Ready, Set, Grow webinar series includes Lynda Garvin, who's our presenter today from Valencia County Cooperative Extension, and Sarah Moran is on also behind the scenes. John Garlish is also online, and they are joining us from Bernalillo County Extension. We also have Suzanne Cole, and she is joining us from Mora County. Amanda Skidmore is our integrated pest management specialist. And I'm, again, Marisa Thompson, and I'm the urban horticulture specialist. And we are all with the New Mexico State University Cooperative Extension Service. So let's see, many of you are joining us again and again. We love seeing your faces again and having great questions in the chat. The way that it normally works is that questions can be added into the Zoom chat box, or if you're watching online on Facebook with a live video, you can enter questions on the Facebook page. That's the NM Desert Blooms Facebook page is sharing this presentation live. And we welcome questions, and we're going to be saving questions for the end, and that's how it's been working well with our presenters. I think that we'll continue to do that. And so if you share your question in the chat, but if you would please avoid or refrain from responding back to other people's questions, and we'll save the questions for the presenters. That makes it easier for people to focus on the presentation content. And then we also please invite you to silence your device, or whatever device you're signing in on, and turn off your video. And looks like most people have already done that. And so that helps us to be sharing this information across to as many people. We have maybe we have a bunch of registrants for today, and so we'll keep including people coming in as they sign in. So with that, I think, Lynda, we're ready for you to start.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone to the Permaculture in the Home Landscapes class. And I will preface this by saying that when I took my permaculture design certification course, it was 7 days, 10 hours a day. And then I did a week after of hands-on on the farm. So in 1 hour, we're just going to scratch the surface, and hopefully I'll give you enough information to get you motivated and intrigued, and you'll go check out some of the resources we have in the presentation. And we have a poll going now, a pre-test poll, to see what is your level of knowledge about permaculture at this point in time before you attend the class. So I'm going to try to forward my slides. Okay. All right. So permaculture began as a joint effort between Bill Mollison and David Holmgren at the University of Tasmania in 1974. So they developed a framework and a course for a sustainable agricultural system that they called permaculture. And a simple way of describing permaculture is to say that permaculture is an approach to land management and a philosophy that adopts arrangements observed in flourishing natural ecosystems. So it's looking at patterns and designs within nature and incorporating those into your home landscape. Permaculture isn't just a way of doing things. It's a mindset, it's a lifestyle, it's a holistic driven set of behaviors. And it's socially responsible life choices and also constantly evolving, adapting to your home space. And Bill Mollison, who, like I said, he's like the father of the permaculture movement. He said the greatest change we can make is from consumption to production, even if on a small scale. So if only 10% of us do this, grow some of our food at home, there's enough for everyone. And predictions are that if we're going to feed the world in the future, it's going to be those small producers who are going to be handling the large percentage of that food production and not huge commercial operations. So we can be part of that ourselves. Permaculture includes a set of ethics which are earth care, people care, and share of surplus. Meaning for earth care that we take an oath, like a Hippocratic oath for the earth, saying that I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm. So we want to do everything to help protect the environment that we live in. And also to work with nature and not against nature, to build and protect our natural resources. It's based on simplicity and diversity, and also doing more with less. People care includes seeing that everything and everyone is connected. Nothing is separated from anything else. And we want to meet basic needs of food, water, shelter, education, meaningful livelihood, and connection. And also we want to help people become self-reliant and promote community responsibility within that whole people care ethic of the permaculture movement. And we want to share our excesses, our surplus. So this could be sharing our time with projects that support natural resources and improving our natural environments, products such as what we produce in our gardens, money, our energy, and all these contribute to supporting earth and people care. So we're going to do a little experiment. I want you to close your eyes and imagine that you have a magic marker. And I want you to write a capital E on your forehead. So close your eyes, you have a magic marker in your hand, and you write a capital E on your forehead. And now that everyone has done that, we're going to take a poll. So Marisa, if you want to launch the poll. Okay, so based on the slide, let's say I'm looking at your forehead. Is the E open to the left, or is the E opening facing the right? So we have people. All right. Oh, wow. That's interesting. Okay. All righty. Okay, so what does this all mean? It looks like the majority of people, not much of a margin there, but about 59% of you said your E faces to the right. And that margin is growing now. So I'm going to go and tell you what that means. So this is an actual experiment they did at a psychology department, and it's based on perspective. So if you put your E with the open side to the left, This indicates an orientation towards your own perspective in complex social situations. So that means you're more likely to use yourself as your own best resource. So whatever you think is the best for that situation, you're not one to go and ask a lot of people what they think. You use your own ideas and your own mental wherewithal to make decisions. And if your E is open to the right, that means that you might take into consideration what others' perspectives are when making decisions. So you go in, you talk to people, find out what their views are, think about it, and then base your decision taking into consideration what other people think. And you may be asking, well, what does this have to do with permaculture? And oops, sorry about that. Oh my goodness. Okay. There we go. And it has to do with perspective. So I'm going to get to that in a second. After I tell you, I was thinking, okay, what can I give you? What can I arm you with to walk away and have some good ideas about what permaculture is and what things you can do within your landscape to be more permaculture oriented. So the biggest thing you can do is to observe your landscape. So what's happening there? I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. Also to mimic or mirror natural systems. So in our desert environment, what does that look like in nature? Pattern to design simply means using patterns found in nature and incorporating them into the design of your homescape. And also looking at plant groupings or plant guilds is what they call them in permaculture. How plants can thrive and support each other in groups and not a monoculture or simply having one thing growing in one place. So having lots of diversity of plants. Looking at edge effect, we'll talk more about that, stacking resources and also succession. So we want to work with nature. We want to see problems as solutions. So actually anything that we see as an issue or problem can become an opportunity. And also everything in the landscape has multiple purposes and supports other elements. So you have a backup. So if something doesn't work or something fails, you have some other element within your homescape to support it and to fill in for that. Okay, so in permaculture, awareness is the first step to change, and awareness is the first step to change for anything really. And for you, that means observing your landscape. So another thing I want you to do right now is if you have a piece of paper, just do a simple diagram of your property right now. Wherever you are, just put a boundary. This is the edge of my property. This is maybe where my house is. Very simple, very quick, very easy. And now I want you to put yourself on that piece of paper. So draw a little stick figure representing you on that piece of paper. And I think, yes, here's the poll. So, okay. So Marisa, if you want to launch the next poll, there we go. Okay. So when you put yourself in your homescape, where did you put yourself? Oh, wow. Okay. 100% so far have said they are in it. So you're within that property. And we have a couple people who drew themselves outside their property line or their boundary. So the majority of you, 96% said you're in it. And then 4% said you're outside of it. And actually, I just thought it's not scientific or anything. I was just curious to see how you see yourself. And this might be an indicator of how you see yourself in your landscape. So next slide. All righty. Okay, so where do I stand in my system, landscape, foodscape? So according to Bill Mollison, everything we do to other life forms, we do to ourselves. So the big perspective is, do we see ourselves as a part of nature, as nature, or do we see ourselves apart from nature? So depending on your diagram, if you drew yourself inside, perhaps you're more aware of the fact that you are a part of the landscape and not apart from it. And maybe if you drew yourself outside the boundary, maybe you see things from a bigger perspective, and might think of yourself as apart from nature and not a part of it. So just a little, maybe do some soul searching about that, of where you see yourself in the landscape. If you're outside the boundary, are you someone who thinks that you can control things and make things go your way? Or you're more of a inclusive person who sees yourself as part of the landscape and working with nature, working as a part of nature, and having things flow according to natural flows. Okay, so here's the perspective shift I was talking about, that experiment. So do you see yourself as a part of nature or a part from nature? And Aldo Leopold, who wrote a Sand County Almanac and other really beautiful books about nature and how we fit into nature, he said, we abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. So are you seeing your property as a commodity, or are you seeing your property as a community in which you belong, and that you are a component of that community, a member of that community? The most important thing you can do to start on your permaculture path and to save money and time and energy on your part is to take time to observe your landscape, your homescape, your property. So you want to work with nature, not against it. So living in the high desert, you want to look at the land and the natural environments around you. You want to look and see what it was like in the past before we had a lot of development happening. Even going and reading natural history books about our area, looking at what native vegetation and wildlife exists in these environments, and also looking at traditional foods that have been grown here. So with the Pueblos, what kind of foods were people eating hundreds of years ago? And thinking about how that might fit into your permaculture plan for your property. And the next step is to observe your surroundings and do a site assessment. So this is going to take you a full year to do. And you may say, I don't have time to do that. But especially if you're going to put in any kind of permanent structures or irrigation systems or like solar panels, this will really be a money and time saver and an energy saver if you take time to do a site assessment. And if you go online, you can find lots of examples of permaculture site assessments, checklists that you can go through. So you want to walk on your property and figure out places where you like to hang out, where you like to walk, where you like to play, where the water is on your landscape. So when it rains, where does the water go? Unfortunately, too bad this didn't happen last week when we had those nice rains, that you could actually look and see where water falls, where it tends to pool if we have a good rain. And then you can later take advantage of those places and direct water to where it's needed, or even grow more water-loving plants in those areas where water might pool naturally on the landscape. Looking at the wind patterns throughout the year, the sun and shade patterns throughout the year, because they will change depending on the season. I have some greens in raised beds under a little shade structure, and I thought, oh, great. For fall, I'm going to plant them, and then I'll have nice greens during the winter. And I'm actually still harvesting them in the spring, but it took them a long time to actually start growing because I have 2 big cottonwoods in the backyard. So those leaves didn't fall out till December, even into January. So there was a lot of shade there that I wasn't anticipating because I didn't pay attention to where the shade was on the property throughout the different seasons. Looking at warm and cool areas in your property. So like the north side of buildings tend to be cooler than the south or west sides. So looking if you have any heat sinks or any areas where cool air travels downhill. So if you have any low-lying areas where it might be cooler than other areas and using those to your advantage, where wildlife might come across your property, and looking at the naturally occurring plant communities or what you already have on your property that might be growing there. So take time to do this to really get to know what you have, and then from there start planning your permaculture homescape. And you may be asking, well, what's the difference between permaculture and organic gardening? Well, the difference is by design. So I just found this picture today, which I thought was pretty funny. So you have the chicken in the middle with the French flag. So I'm assuming it's like join the revolution of the permaculture revolution. So on the left side is an organic garden. Things are in lines. It's very manicured, very orderly. In permaculture, you're mimicking natural systems. So you don't find many straight lines in nature, especially in plant communities. You don't find things in nice rows in straight lines. So mimicking more of our natural communities and how they grow and plant communities succeed each other in nature. Design is making connections between things. So when I'm talking about design, I'm talking about the bigger picture where you're looking at all different aspects of what you're putting in your homescape or your landscape or your foodscape. I'm using those terms interchangeably. Making connections. So it's not something you need a degree in. It's something just being observant and finding out, how are things connected and how can one element support another element? Everything is viewed in relation to other things and not in isolation. And look for and build relationships so they work together efficiently. So this is a huge permaculture principle. Looking that everything is connected and finding those connections. And a way to do that is looking at, as I said, you're reflecting on your natural environment, which has a lot of diversity and plant density into it. You don't find monocultures in nature. So you have a lot of plants interspersed, working together, growing together. And patterns design, again, using natural patterns like circles and spirals and undulating edges versus straight edges. Looking at plant communities, those plant guilds that are adapted to local soils and climates. So selecting plants that do well in our drought conditions and also with our high alkaline soils. In order to help you map out these connections between elements within your permaculture landscape, foodscape, it's fun to do resource maps, is what I call them. So here's a chicken. So thinking about all the benefits a chicken can supply your homescape or your landscape or your foodscape. So one chicken, it can provide you with eggs, maybe eventually provide you with meat. It provides you with manure that you can put in your compost pile to fertilize the soil. If you have a chicken tractor, you can let them go on your property. They can help you with insect pest management. They can help kind of scratch the soil surface to allow more air to get in the soil, to loosen up the soil. So instead of a rototiller, allow your chickens to kind of work over the soil and move them around on your property. So that one chicken provides many, many different functions within that landscape. And you can do this for anything. You can do it for a rain barrel. You can do it for, let's say, squash plants. Anything that you're going to put or plant in your landscape, you can actually do a resource map. And you may not want to do it for everything, but it's a great way to start seeing those connections and how one element can support another and be a backup if something else doesn't work. So seeing everything as connected. And also seeing things as supports for other elements. So here's a picture of a solar panel. And it's on a wooden frame, and they've also using that wooden frame as a plant stand. And also as a shade structure for some of those plants underneath it. You can see a rain barrel in the picture. So as an alternate water source, let's say your well pump goes out, then you have some rain barrels around the property that you can use if you need to water, hand water, or maybe, using a hose from the house bib or a house faucet that you can use to help water. Let's say if your well goes dry or your well pump goes out. So just having different things in place. So if something is not working temporarily or something fails completely, that you have a backup for it. So plant groupings is another concept in permaculture, or plant guilds. And one of the best known plant guilds is the Three Sisters, and that's originated in the Southwest, having corn as a structural plant to provide a kind of support for the bean plants that are planted underneath it. And then you have your squash plants, which are providing also shade for your beans and other things on the ground, cooling off the ground, the soil, so you don't have any bare ground within that system. So they have similar water and sun requirements. So that's a key concept for your plant groupings, that you group them according to their water and their sun needs. So you don't have water loving plants and with drought tolerant plants. So they are giving them the right amount of water and they're getting the sun that they need so that they can thrive together. And they all benefit each other. So the beans are providing nitrogen in the soil. And as I said, the corn is providing a scaffolding for those bean plants, and those melon or squash plants are providing shade for other plants. And also weed control, and also providing habitat for natural insect predators. So unfortunately for us in the Southwest, there hasn't been a lot of work done, and plant guilds, which plants work well together. So perhaps that's something we can work on together. Maybe I can send out a survey letter. So if you have ideas of or know of plant communities that you've worked with, that you've created in your property that work really well together, that we can find those out and then share those with other people so we don't have to start from scratch. And it's all about sharing, remember, one of those ethics of permaculture. So working with nature and not against it, cooperation, not competition. So here's a picture just of a simple gravity-fed water tank that's getting water from the roof, collecting water from the roof. It's built up on a stand, so gravity is allowing that water to flow through a drip irrigation system to different plants on the ground, as opposed to, let's say, having a pump, trying to pump something from a storage container at ground level, that you need to have a small pump in order to get it from the container to your plants on the ground. So working with nature and not against nature. Also in permaculture, there's a saying work is pollution. So tidiness is maintained disorder and a waste of energy. So what they're trying to say is, in permaculture, you don't need neat lines. Like I said, there are very few straight lines, and there's very few squares and rectangles in nature. So mimicking natural environments, they have soft undulating edges. They're dense in planting. They don't have straight margins. Things are grown together in community and taking up different space, either vertically or horizontally. So growing up for vertical planting, or growing and spreading out for horizontal plantings. So it doesn't need to be a manicured system. Like I said, work is pollution. Mimicking nature with an edge effect. So if you look at natural systems and natural ecological environments, the most productive and the areas that have the most diversity in plants and insects and wildlife are those transition zones, or the edges of one ecological zone to another. So you want to mimic that within your home landscape, in your foodscape. So instead of having straight edges, you have kind of meandering edges. You have little inlets. So you're creating more space in a smaller area. At the bottom picture, you can see here's a pond a 1/4 acre pond. So in that, if you just went around the edge of that 1/4 acre pond that has a straight edge, or not straight, but it doesn't have any inlets, it's just a flat circle there, you can get 32 plants. Let's say you can get 32 plants around that. But if you make it with indentations, ins and outs and curvy, then you can get twice as many plants in the same amount of space. So you can increase your yields because you're doubling your area by creating these meandering and kind of undulating edges within your landscape. And like I said, you don't see many squares or rectangles in nature. So the edge effects will also give you the greatest diversity and also the greatest fertility within your homescape or your landscape. Relative location. So another part of this is looking at once you observe your landscape and you have your site assessment, going with the flow of the water, the land, and your personal habits and energy. So you want to start small and get it right. So don't do huge projects. Get a feel for your property, where things are, how things flow through it, whether that's water, whether that's wind, those shade and sun patterns, doing things small, making sure it works, and then expanding those things that work, and kind of cutting back on things that don't work so well or eliminating them. Also in permaculture, they refer to things, to the property in zones. So zone 0 is actually your home and where you live. And then as you go out from your home, the further away you go, the less intensive the work required for that area. So you have your 0 zone, which is your house. Zone 1 is your most intensive work area. So maybe it's your vegetable beds. Maybe your chickens are going to be out in zone 2. So things that require less care and maintenance are going to be further away from your home. Just that it's the principle of out of sight, out of mind. So if things that are in your eyesight, when you walk out of your house, you're more likely to see things as they happen and be able to take care of things if there's any issues that come up, versus something that's further out on the edges of the property that you might not frequent as much or see as often as you do things that are surrounding your actual house. And part of permaculture, regenerative gardening, regenerative ag is building healthy soil. So healthy soil is the foundation to anything within nature. Healthy soils provide for healthy plants, which provide for healthy people. So we want to really take care of our soils and build our soil health. That is crucial for anything we do within permaculture. I suggest you get a soil test right now so that you get a baseline and know where you're starting from. So even if you've been gardening for years, send it off to get a soil test so you know what the pH is, how much organic matter is there, what nutrients are there. So you don't add things that you don't need and waste money doing that. And then over time, if you do it every year, you can look at, where you started and celebrate how far you've come in building your soil health from year to year. So for vegetables, the optimum pH is from 6 to 7.2. And here are high alkaline soils or, exceed 7.5, but I would say that most of us, have even pHs that are in the 8 or higher. So when you have high pH, you tend to start binding nutrients in the soil. So they're bound so tightly to soil particles, even though they might be present and actually be abundant in our soils, they're not accessible to plants. They're not available to plants. So things like iron, magnesium, calcium, and phosphorus are less available to plants, and you might have some nutritional deficiencies within your plants in your landscape as well as your vegetable crops due to our high alkaline soils. So it's good to know what it is, where you're starting, and then over time adding organic matter to your soil will really help with all those issues, and that you only add amendments as you need them. So here it is. Organic matter is kind of the foundation. It can help with clay soils here. It can help with sandy soils. It can help with the pH. It helps with releasing nutrients slowly into the soil. So adding organic matter is crucial to our soil health here in the desert, high desert. Looking at water resources, I know we're going into another drought year, and there's been announcements from NMDA, the Department of Agriculture, asking us to, if you're a producer, not to grow things this year or not start anything new in our desert. It's the most limiting resource that we have. So that's why it's really important to really carefully look at those water patterns on our property. Where is it found? Like, maybe you have an artificial pond, or you have some water harvesting tanks on your property, and where it flows when it rains, so that we can use our water resources as efficiently as possible. Some ways to do that is we want to be able to slow the water down when it does rain, and to keep it on our property, to keep it on site. Some ways that you can do that, some simple ways, are you can just build, here's a landscape to the left. You don't see it, but there's a canale up at the top. The house is connected to this adobe wall, but up above there's a canale which releases water when it rains. It goes down into this built kind of little stream, dry stream bed they put in their property, and that leads out to an apricot tree. So they're actually collecting and diverting water when it rains to places where they can use it, such as a fruit tree, which would require more moisture than other plants perhaps in the landscape. Another simple thing is to use French drains. So here, where I live, we have one of these under each of these of our canales. So the water comes off the canale into this little kind of receptacle. Here's a French drain, which is like an accordion tube of plastic with holes in it. So it leads the water underground to areas in the yard where you can use it. So you can divert that water to trees, or to maybe different plantings that you may have in your property, so you can get water to where it's needed on the landscape. Or even simple rain barrels is a great way to collect water. And here's a simple gravity fed system using a hose to deliver that. So you can hand water, or maybe attach it to a soaker hose and use that to slow down the water and keep it on site. Another way to more efficiently use water on the landscape, and also to keep it from evaporating, is by covering it up. So you don't want a lot of bare soil on your property. The majority of our native bees are ground nesting bees. So you want some bare area. And actually you'll probably be able to see where they're living. You'll see little cones in the ground that open up in the spring. But most of the time you want it to be covered up with some kind of mulch. So this reduces water loss by moderating soil temperature. So when it's really hot out in the summer, it's keeping the soil underneath it cooler, which reduces the evaporation of water from the soil. It protects the plants, also reduces weeds. So it keeps weeds from sprouting, or if they do come up, they're a lot easier to pull out. Also providing slow nutrient release, and it keeps veggies off the soil surface and keeps them clean. So that's really nice for harvesting. So covering up with traditional mulches like straw, wood chips, pine needles, even gravel can be a mulch, keeping the soil cooler underneath it. There's all kinds of organic mulches. So using the best mulch for whatever you're planting, wherever it is in your homescape, your landscape. You can also have plant mulches. So these are living mulches, plants with large leaves that you can use to provide shade. So like the squash plants and the Three Sister are actually are being used, serving also as plant mulches, leaving them on there. You can also, at the end of the season, cut off the leaves and just drop them on the soil to cover the soil. Or you can cut and compost those leaves later on in the season when they're no longer growing, and put them in your compost to help put some green nitrogen into your compost piles. So really good examples of this are squash, comfrey plants, rhubarb, and cardoons. So cardoons do really well here. And there's a picture of a cardoon. So it provides a live mulch and also can provide mulching, composting materials at the end of the season. You can also cover it up with perennial mulches. So on the left is New Zealand white clover underneath a fruit orchard. So it's providing shade for that soil. It's keeping the soil cooler for those trees. It's reducing evaporation of moisture from the soil. It's also providing nitrogen to the soil because clovers are nitrogen fixing plants. Sesbania is another a cover crop that you can use in larger areas, and also sandfoin. So there's lots of circulars on the NMSU website on cover crops and nitrogen producing plants that you can use as cover crops in your landscapes. So you may have heard about swales. We don't use them so much in the Southwest unless you have some kind of slopes. A lot of us don't have slopes, but if you do, it's a great way to slow down water when it rains. Also direct it to where you want it and to hold that water in the landscape. A simple thing is, doing those little basins around trees in order to keep water where the roots are. This is just a little one, so it's just a little tree basin. But, putting water where it needs, where those active roots are. And also larger trees, it's a little harder to do that, but at least that provides, extra moisture for that tree while it's establishing itself in your homescape. Also, another thing to do, especially if you have trees, are soil sponges. So this is a really simple thing. You just dig a hole and fill it with organic matter. You can use in, old circulars, or not circulars, like mailing, newspaper, anything paper, any kind of paper products. It's better if you shred them, but here they're putting in whole newspaper sections in a hole. You cover it up with soil. So when it rains, it actually holds water in the soil longer. So among larger trees where you maybe not be able to provide supplemental water to them, it's a great way to take advantage of any rainfall that we might have. So it absorbs and holds soil moisture, and it's really great for trees. I met someone over in Edgewood who before they built on the property, they had a lot of pine trees and they were suffering from drought stress. So he did some of these soil sponges among the roots of these larger trees. And sure enough, after a couple years, it really helped keep moisture in the soil, and the trees came back and were doing really well. And another part of permaculture is, growing our own food, no matter what scale. It could be just a couple things in raised beds, or maybe a larger scale to be more self-sufficient or more self-reliant, or simply to have excess that you can share with your neighbors, or maybe local food pantries. That's all part of that sharing the surplus with others. We talked about plant diversity, how important that is, but also diet diversity. I just did a class on sustainable diets, and according to FAO, 75% of the world's food comes from just 12 plants and 5 animal species. So in the big picture, that's not really very, that's kind of scary. It's not very resilient to have everything based on such a small amount of plants and animals. So within our own landscapes, foodscapes, we can create a more diverse diet by having a lot more diverse plantings for the food crops that we're producing for ourselves and sharing with others. So small scale intensive gardens are very important in permaculture. So especially if you're starting out, you don't need, start out small. Like I said, you want to use intensive gardening techniques, which includes diverse plantings. So if you have diverse plantings, you prevent the buildup of insect pests, weeds, and disease populations. Stress plants give off electrical signals, they give off pheromones, chemical signals to insect pests. So if they're being munched on, they send out signals, help, I'm being munched on, and then those more insect pests can come in and start invading your plants. So if you have diverse plantings, all those chemical signals kind of mix up the signals that get sent out in nature. So insect pests and even diseases are less likely to infect or invade your garden, your landscape, your foodscapes, because there's a lot of different plants in one place growing together, and it kind of disrupts signals to those insect pests. It also, part of that is confusing those insect pests because they're smelling. They are usually associated with specific plants or plant families. So if they're getting a lot of mixed signals, they might not be able to find your food crops as well as they could if you just have a big bed of one thing, such as beans. It also adds variety to your garden and to your plate. So providing a diverse diet as well as a diverse planting environment. And also in that include insectary plants. So NMSU has some circulars and bulletins on its website on insectary mixes. So if you want to attract beneficial insects that will help you manage your pest populations, it's good to have habitat and water for them. Intensive gardening spaces. So like I said, you don't have to have lines. That's kind of, that's organic gardening versus the permaculture principle of mimicking natural systems. So like I said, you don't see straight lines in nature. So getting different garden spaces going, you don't need to plant according to the instructions on that seed packet. You can buy these little templates, wood or plastic, to help you depending on what you're planting. They have different spacings for different vegetables. And this is often referred to as biointensive gardening, where you're closer spacing in patterns. And what that does is, number one, you get more in a smaller space. Also, it's outcompeting the weeds that might come in. And also, like I said, sending out mixed signals to any insect pests that are out there. So square foot gardening is an example of that. Also over here on the left, you can see it, they built a simple wooden frame with a chicken wire tacked on the bottom. You just place that in your planting bed. You can do it in a container bed as well as on bare soil, an in-ground planting bed. They're putting a seed within each hexagonal within that chicken wire, and then covering it lightly with some dirt. And then you just lift that frame up off the soil, and the plants, the seeds are covered and planted in a dense planting configuration. Also, looking at edibles in your landscape. So that's all, mixing it up, no longer just ornamental beds, but having food within your ornamental beds and having ornamentals within your food beds. So they're all going to be mixed up, supporting each other, supplying different benefit to your planting areas, your beds, also for that diversity. So mimicking nature in diversity of planting and closeness of planting. So, and it can also be very beautiful. I really like these two examples here. So you have cabbage growing in with daffodils and all kinds of different flowering plants and herbs within vegetables. So, mix it up and think outside the box. Also adding perennials to your landscape. So trees and shrubs, woody vines, and perennial vegetables. So things that you don't have to plant every year, and they're gonna become kind of the principal elements of your foodscape or your food forest. So trees, choosing nitrogen fixing trees as well as fruit and nut trees that are gonna provide fruits and nuts for you as well as wildlife. Also, shrubs can create, nice backdrops for different landscape elements, and also your food forest. In nature, you don't see just one level of tree. They have all different levels of, there's an understory, there's different canopy sizes and different heights. So mixing it up with heights and spread of canopies in your trees and shrubs. Also some vegetables, perennial vegetables that you can plant, and they might go for several years. Are asparagus, garlic, sunchokes, and artichokes. So things that are going to be consistent and in the landscape year after year after year. So saving on your energy. Also filling vertical spaces with edibles. So if you look at a forest environment, you can, you have different species of trees that grow to different heights, that have different take up different space within that environment. So you can do the same thing with vertical spaces, especially if you have a small area to work with. You can create a lot more growing area by growing things vertically, and you can, it saves time, you can save space, you can also save your back because you're not bending over. Here's some do it yourself examples. On the right, you have a pallet that they simply filled with potting soil and then planted all kinds of herbs and lettuce and some perennial, some annual flowers on the top. And on the left, you have these simple like canvas pouches that they sewed together and hung off a fence. So that's a great way to take advantage of vertical space within your property. There's the plant it and forget it garden. So this is a raised bed, but you could do this on in-ground beds as well. But creating these vertical structures with simple wire frames to allow things to grow upward, and then also having traditional lettuces and other things at the lower level of that bed. Different ways. Here's a cattle fencing that you can buy. You can make it into an arch and grow beans and cucumbers on the top, and then have different things hanging, having beans and squash growing up the support structures. Here's a simple frame with some string across it, making a grid for beans to grow up. So there's a lot of ways, and there's a lot of DIY examples online. So if you just look up vertical growing spaces, you can find thousands and thousands of examples of how you can do that in your home landscape. And it also can take advantage of materials that you might have lying around that you can use within your landscape, and you don't have to buy anything new. And I mentioned this before, but creating those insectaries or those areas that attract beneficial insects and pollinators that will help pollinate your vegetable crops and your fruit and nut trees, as well as really get healthy vegetables going. So in order to do that, you want to have places for them to have habitat, so a safe home for them where they can hide out and even build their nests. And also very important in our desert environment is providing water sources for them. So here's a simple, just a saucer with some rocks in it. So you can have a terracotta clay saucers with marbles or rocks that you, small rocks, and be sure that you fill them so there's always water in them. They evaporate rather quickly. Or maybe have little bird baths or any little water features. It doesn't have to be expensive or elaborate, but just having places where animals can come and drink, birds, insects, wildlife have a place to have drinking water. And it might also keep them from eating your irrigation tubing if they have some readily available water in the landscape. So also getting to know the life cycle of this beneficial insects so you can recognize them in all their life cycles. So here's your ladybug, which is super aphid eater. So here's the adult, there's the eggs. The eggs hatch into the larva, and the larvae are really, really ravenous aphid eaters. And then they morph into the pupa, which becomes the adult. So if you know what it looks like in every cycle so that you can protect them and keep them on your plants and doing their job to help you manage your insect pests. If you don't know what it is and you see this lady bug larvae, you might think it's some kind of pest that's going to eat your plants and get rid of it, take it off, hand pick it off, but you want it there. So you want to know what the bad guys look like in their life cycles. So our common pests, and also looking at those beneficial insects. Seed saving is also a crucial part of permaculture and any garden, I would say. So seeds are really important. I don't know about you, but during COVID in the beginning, a lot of commercial seed companies weren't taking orders simply because they didn't have staff to help to package those seed orders. So it basically stopped sending out filling orders, and a lot of people were looking for seeds in the spring and early summer for their gardens, and even commercial growers, and they couldn't get them because they weren't available. So a good way to get around that is to, collect seeds from your own vegetables. Another reason that that's really important is every time you buy a packet of seeds, you're starting from ground zero, which sometimes you got to start from ground zero. So let's say this is the first year you're going to grow radishes. So you need to start somewhere. So unless you have a friend who can share seeds that they've collected and saved with you, you probably will need to buy some seeds. And also, if you want to try new varieties, you may have to buy seeds from a commercial seed company. But look for things that are in our region, at least, if not locally. And every time you save a seed from one growing season to the next, you are selecting the best of the best, and they are super adapters to our growing conditions. So every year that you save seeds from your garden, those are the plants that have really mastered adapting to the changes in our climate, into our weather patterns, into our rainfall. And you want those. So every year it's quickly adapting to the changes in our not only the weather, but our climate changes. And we're becoming drier and hotter every year. So those that do really well in those conditions, save the seeds from those. And every year it's going to keep adapting and adapting and adapting. And that's what we need to have happen. And then creating local seed systems by simply sharing it with your neighbors and friends, or actually donating them to maybe local seed libraries so that you can have a bigger outreach with your seeds that you're saving. Many Master Gardener programs have seed libraries that you can come and get seeds. And also, hopefully, we'll have some seed swaps coming in the fall, so you can come to larger events where people will be sharing seeds that they've saved themselves. Here's some permanent permaculture resources. So these are all free online classes, and Marissa is going to post those in the chat. Also, I will make a handout that we'll have available. I can send it to everyone on the registration list. This one, North Carolina State University has a whole college course on permaculture design. So you can do a whole course for free from North Carolina State University. But these other resources are really good to help you start you on your way. Let's say you need an inventory to do your resource assessment, or doing maps, or even looking at different ways that you can map your property. They're all really excellent. Some books that you might want to invest in is the Earth User's Guide to Permaculture, Gaia's Garden, which also is a website by Toby Hemingway, excellent for the home scale permaculturists. And the Permaculture Market Garden, even though you may not want to do commercial or plan to sell your food that you're growing, it has some great mapping and some great illustrations in there that you can use for your home landscape and permaculture scape. So that's it for me. That I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully it can get you started. There's my email. Please feel free to email me if you have questions or want more information.
Thanks, Lynda. I'm going to post. We've got great feedback in the chat, and also some questions to go over. And so first I want to give you the link to the survey. So I know many of you that have joined us again and again, you may have filled out the survey before, but the surveys are used with each session. So it does help us as we are developing this program further. So please click on that link that just got shared for the total program survey. And then for the questions, I have, on the background, I was working on answering one of them about soil testing, and I saw that John Garlish also posted a link for soil testing. So there was a question about that. One question, I think, Lynda, that would you go back to when you were talking about the soil sponges, and a question from Sophia was, how do you dig, or do you dig just one soil hole for one tree, or several holes around one tree? And then also, how deep are they? And while you're answering that, I'm going to post my answers to the two other questions.
Okay. Yeah, Sophia, so you want to put numerous, just like you would have numerous emitters or waters around the tree where the active roots are, you dig small holes. So how deep you can get it is going to be dependent on how deep you can get it. So if you have clay soils and it's hardpan or caliche, wetting up the area, you might get it a little deeper. So at least try to get it a foot deep so that it's, down near active roots, because tree roots and other roots, within the first 2 feet of the soil profile is where most of the active roots are. So you wanted to get it down at least a foot if possible. But, some land, you may have a big rock, so put as many around as you can. Yeah, so you want it evenly distributed around the tree in the active root zone. So it depends on you how many you want to put out, as many, how much energy you have. So just, kind of use your, if it's a big tree, you may need more, but it's once and done. So you do it once and then you cover it, and then it'll stay there for a long time, especially with our dry soils. So. But you can find out more information on how to do that. It's not an exact science. So gardening is part art, part science. So part of it is just trial and error and experimentation.
And then, thank you. There were a couple questions about fruit trees. So one of them is, which fruiting shrubs are best for New Mexico, especially Santa Fe? The first one that came to my mind is golden currants.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
So I'm not sure what others. Maybe we should have a whole shrub session.
Right. Oh, excellent. Well, we just had one yesterday in Master Gardener training, shrubs and perennials, and it was excellent with one of our Master Gardeners. So she's amazing. But so golden currants, one I can think of. We don't have a lot here in New Mexico. I'm trying to think of others. I think there's some small trees that can be more shrub-like, but I don't know off the top of my head, but I don't know about the plant guide, the plant thing on Desert Blooms, Marisa, that have a lot of fruiting shrubs.
There, I think I'd like to use that for one of my columns, so I'm going to work on that.
Okay. So Marisa is going to come up with
John's online, and maybe he can help us pick another question. Oh, elderberry is another. So
yes, excellent. Yeah, that does really well here. Elderberries and currants, but I can't. Good question.
There was another question about resource about fruit trees grown years ago.
Yes. There is an NMSU circular on fruit and nut trees for New Mexico. For the home orchard. So you can look at that. They've done research on different varieties that do well here. So that's a place to start at least, and I think it breaks it up into different zones. So you can look and see which ones might do better for northern, higher elevations, or northern New Mexico, where it might be a little cooler and more moisture versus, the middle Rio Grande of southern New Mexico.
Okay. I have to sign off. Y'all can continue with the questions in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marisa. All righty. Okay, Oops, there's the chat. So now I can actually see the choke cherries. Okay, choke cherries are good, but they're actually a tree. So I don't know how big they get. I'm from the Midwest, so we had huge choke cherry trees. So yes, here I'm sure they don't get very big. So that might be another alternative. Thank you. Goji berries, excellent. All right. Yeah, goji berries do well here in our hot, dry climate. Thank you, everybody. I think, yeah. All righty. So a lot of information, like I said, but there's a lot of resources out there for you. Hopefully it just inspired you to, start digging deeper and putting into practice some of these permaculture principles. Is there a dangerous pest that I cannot touch with bare hands? Ooh. Oh, yeah. Well, thinking of getting rid of any at first sight. I don't know. I don't think we have. What do you think, John? I don't know. A dangerous pest. Well, that's why it's a good idea to figure out who we do have common pests of New Mexico. Ask your master gardeners program. If you have a master gardener program, there's I know I have a list of common insect pests for gardeners, vegetables, and ornamentals, and most of those are not harmful to you. I can't think of anything, aside from black widow spiders. There's some caterpillars that have hair that are hairy that can be irritants. If you're, some people can get irritated by those, but I can't think of anything that you really need to be afraid of. But the best thing is to know what are the good guys and what are the bad guys so that you only take off like the tomato hornworms versus taking off something that is a beneficial insect, right? And we do have information on beneficial insects as well on our website at NMSU pubs. Just Google it and you'll find a lot of information. Okay. Yeah, black widow, definitely scorpions. Yeah, so I think those are pretty recognizable, but just general insight, garden pests you might find on your vegetable crops, your vegetable plants, not so much. Okay. Yeah, so once you for those soil sponges, you just fill it with paper. If you can shred it, that's really good, or not. And then you just put soil on the top. Yeah, like a couple inches of soil. And then as it settles, just add more soil on the top. And then rain, it'll start settling again. So just keep putting soil on top. Let's see, bug guide. Yes, excellent. Yeah, that's a great online resource to look up insect pests. Okay, goji berries go completely dormant in the summer and look nasty. No good info source on how to grow better. Okay, well, a lot of things really don't do well in our summer because it's so hot and our sun is so strong. So a lot of things, the pollen becomes infertile, flowers drop off. So like spring and summer, you may get a flush again of flowers and berries later on in the season. So maybe if they're not very big, you can provide a frame with shade cloth on it to keep them cooler. That's one way of kind of making an environment that's cooler than the ambient temperature. Mulching around them so that you keep moisture in the soil. Yeah, so look at shade cloth and creating little shade structures for your goji berries. It's just like everything is really suffering. Last summer it was so hot, tomatoes stopped growing altogether and just waited for it to cool down at the end of August before it started setting fruit again. So that might happen for a lot of your plants. Okay, I think that's everything. All right. So are we done? And I'm gonna, shall I stop the meeting, John? Composting advice in the forest. So if you want to more questions, just email me lgarvin, LGARVIN @nmsu.edu. Great, thank you. All righty.